That is a fancy open.
That's impressive.
It's 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
I still can't get used to it.
It's like our pump-up music for the show.
Totally. It's our walk-up song.
Yeah, that's it.
I got the blue shirt memo. I didn't get the flare memo, though.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know you were going to upstage me with a pocket square.
Well,
let that be noted. You know, we don't do pocket squares on the stream, Joe.
We don't? Yeah, I feel like this is should be part of like a magic trick or something.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
you can keep on pulling it out.
It's like, look at this.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
What the heck?
That's absolutely absurd. All right.
I'll be eating fire next, right?
And juggling and the whole thing. So thank you for joining us here on Eye on the Election. I am Brad Edwards.
And I'm Joe Donlon. Great to have you with us. We're getting close to Election Day or night, or as one of our guests tonight is going to tell us, Election Week.
Yeah.
We should probably point out, too, that our A-team is out. We couldn't sync up. And Kimberly Goen was in.
Yeah.
Pat Brady had the issues this week.
Yeah, Kimberly Goen, our lawyer and friend of the stream, WVON talk show host. She's always game.
Yeah.
Pat
well, Brady's
Brady,
always game, too, but he just had, what did he have? Like, he had to shuck some corn or something?
He claimed he detasseled corn as a child, and he's a farmer, but...
Isn't it late to be detasseling? Is that
I think that has passed, right? That ship has sailed.
Well, the good news for all of us is that we can tell Pat we upgraded, right? Because we have 3 great guests this week, and we'll bring Kimberly and Pat back next week to wrap it up before the election the week after that.
We're going to kick it off, though, with jack of all trades, political producer, investigative producer, the Bulldog, John Drummond's producer, a friend of the stream, a friend of ours, Ed Marshall.
Looks like he also drives Uber, maybe. He does it all.
Uber passenger now. He's not in the state right now. He's canvassing the United States for the stream today.
Yeah, I'm up in north central Wisconsin in Waupaca County, actually, for some business. But I do want to talk a little bit about the 6th congressional race, which there's a new development today. I've been on the phone with both campaigns, and a new poll that was in the field this week that was commissioned by the challenger, Republican Orland Park Mayor Keith Peacock. And it now shows him neck and neck, and I mean too close to call, against the incumbent Democrat, Sean Casten. And I believe that is a very significant development in this race, given that the incumbent, Sean Casten, has the advantage of incumbency and that his district was rewritten to grab more Democrat voters.
Yeah, that's an interesting...
Now, the Casten campaign, their reaction to this is, they expected this is a direct quote from them. They expected a tight race all along, and now they've got it.
Yeah, they do. This is something that we should talk about, Ed, because several of these districts have been redrawn. And for the incumbents, I guess you could make the case that this is really the first time they're running in these districts, because even though they are incumbents. But to your point, the way 6 was redrawn, Peacock seems to think will favor him. Explain that.
Well, up until now, the bulk of the 6th was, it used to be solid Republican territory in DuPage County. And then, when that district moved more to the left, it became more Democratic. But now that they've rewritten it, they've given Casten a much bigger chunk of southern Cook County and southwestern Cook County, seemingly Democrats. But many of those Democrats live in several Chicago city wards that are traditionally police and firefighters. These are very conservative Reagan Democrats. They are cultural Democrats, but they believe in, pro-life positions. They're devout Catholics. Many of them had voted for Lipinski in the past. And so it's not a slam dunk that they would cast their vote for Casten. And Peacock believes that is his advantage. He's been the incumbent mayor in Orland Park, which is the largest municipality within the Cook County portion of the district, for 5.5 years. He has name ID. He has staked out strong conservative positions on guns, choice, law enforcement, crime. And, we've seen this issue of crime and the Safety Act is burgeoning up all across the country now. In fact, in New York, several races have become too close to call that were supposed to be blue all the way, because the Safety Act that was put into effect in the state of New York more than a year ago has now resulted in what many hoped for, which was that felons would be unable to post bond, but that by discretion the judges would keep them in jail. And frankly, a lot of the voters in Nassau and Suffolk County, which is adjacent to Manhattan, are very, very upset about the uptick in crime. and it's made the race for governor too close to call, and even the Democrat congressman who's the head of the DCCC, whose seat should be safe, he's on the line. So I do believe that where maybe earlier in this cycle we might have said Sean Casten would look to handily win re-election, and now I don't believe that's the case at all. I believe this is going to be a very competitive race and could be a late night for us.
Yeah, and Pekow is interesting. I mean, there's multiple fronts there. As Ed mentioned, the parts of Chicago that are now redrawn in the district are probably the reddest, if there are any red parts. We'll probably call them pink parts of Chicago that there are.
Sure.
And in Orland Park. And he's got name recognition there, and it's a huge voting municipality. He kept Orland Park open during COVID-19, open for business. He does have a pro-life stance, but, you know, there are caveats on that. And he talks about, you know, with the exception of rape, incest, mother's life. And he also has a story to back up pro-life stances. He was adopted, and he's also adopted kids. And Sean Casten, you know, he had to beat out a fellow congresswoman, Marie Newman,
right,
to even get here. And of course, he's gone at a, you know, terrible personal tragedy,
sure, his
the
daughter
loss
died,
of his
right.
daughter. Ed, how is this all going to shake out? Because, you know, Pekow is going to hit the airwaves, going to get as much publicity as he can right now. You know, wants a debate, so on and so forth. What's Casten got to do to pull this thing out? A district many thought he should win.
Well, Casten, again, has the advantage of incumbency. He also has a fairly large war chest from his own fundraising, along with money that was contributed by the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. They don't want him to lose this seat, so it's a vested interest for them. The issue, I believe, for Casten is that given that a big chunk of his district is now in Cook County, these are voters who never have voted for him before. And as Joe pointed out, he has to introduce himself to them. If he has not introduced himself to them, then essentially these voters don't exist for him. And to think that they would just come into the voting booth or early vote for someone they've never heard of before in this congressional district, I think that's a crapshoot, and I think that that's the risk that Casten is running and what could cost him the seat.
Okay, one other thing, though, just a quick note here. We interviewed both Congressman Casten and Mayor Pekow, and we will have both of those interviews back-to-back on the stream in our effort to inform voters. So stay tuned for that.
All right, Ed, it's interesting to me that you said you think it's going to be a late night. 6 could certainly be there, but if you look at the most recent polling, it sure seems like most of, certainly the key races anyway, the folks on the D side have a comfortable lead, talking about governor and even Secretary of State with Janulius.
Funny you should mention, because this same poll that the Pekow campaign has paid for, and again, it's polling people this week within the 6th congressional district, has Pritzker and Bailey within the margin of error.
Really?
Now, that is not something that any of us, I believe, thought would occur. And does that mean it extrapolates statewide? I can't say that. But in the 6th congressional district, in this poll that was in the field this week, that's what it shows. And so, again, I think this issue of crime, I think the issue of the recession, I think that high gasoline prices, fear of the unknown, are all playing a part right now, and that the issue of choice that was decided by the Supreme Court has certainly motivated female voters, Democrats, in the summertime. That may have faded in their minds by now, and these other issues may have taken precedence.
Right.
And that can be a mistake for these incumbents like Pritzker, because they crafted their television and paid message based on that Supreme Court ruling, and that may be dated now.
I'm sure you saw the WGN poll, which I read yesterday. I'm not sure if it was out this week or earlier than that, but I think that had Pritzker up by almost 20. Is there another congressional district that you think could be tight like 6?
Well, I believe that the Underwood campaign in 14, I think, is going to have a race on their hands, too. There's a guy by the name of Sean Grider, who's the head of the Kendall County Board. And so he's Republican, and the way that district was rewritten, there's a big chunk of territory that Underwood's never been able to cover before. And again, these are new voters to her. Now, they may be Democratic, they may not vote at all. But again, that's a huge risk. I also think that we have the the race for governor with Bailey, if candidates like Peacock, who is a Republican but who has not run before for major office, are drawing positive votes at this stage among swing voters or nominal Democrats who vote conservative, that suggests that this is a factor in the race that was not considered, and that I believe there was some arrogance here. And I believe the redrawing of the state legislative and congressional maps by the Democrats in control in Springfield to reflect population changes in the 2000 census, I believe that they did that thinking they would ensure themselves of easy victory in this statewide election coming up. And I don't believe that any election is ever a foregone conclusion. And I think we're going to see that on election night here in Illinois.
Yeah, and Underwood, this wouldn't be the first time she's had a heck of a race. Almost faced a recount, right, a couple of years
Right.
ago.
I mean, let me interrupt for one more race, and that would be Foster, who's an incumbent Democrat congressman from big chunks of the western suburbs. And he's being challenged by a Trump appointee, a woman by the name of Catalina Lauf. And she's telegenic, she's young, she's enthusiastic, she's been backed by Trump himself. She's got money from the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee. The new district runs from McHenry on the north all the way down to Aurora. Just the notion that an incumbent congressman would have to spend a $5 million war chest to get his message out and to present himself to new voters, that's rather shocking to think that he's got to do that against a neophyte like this young woman, Catalina Lauf.
And that's another one we're going to be highlighting on the stream, too. Okay. So Ed's nailed them all. Ed Marshall, our appreciation. Where are you headed to, by the way?
Right now, I'm in New London, Wisconsin. Wonderful New London on the Wolf River.
On the Wolf River. Well, we hope you enjoy your time. Bring back some curds, and we will see you.
And some, what is this, spotted cow? Is that
spotted cow?
I'm not sure that would be appropriate.
We could do anything. We could do anything on the stream. Yeah. We could have a testing on the stream. Not on TV, though.
Yeah.
Ed, thank you. We appreciate it. Ed Marshall, CBS 2. Our political producer, we're thrilled to have him back. He's going to be here for the next couple of weeks.
And with us on election night.
On election night.
Yeah.
Ed, safe travel.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
Up next, another friend of the stream. We love having Professor of Political Science Suzanne Chod with us from North Central College, one of our favorite political voices. Professor, it's always good to see you. Thanks for the time. You just got a taste of what Ed thinks is going to happen here, and some of the polls have many of these races tightening up. What do you see on election night? I don't know what to make of polls anymore, really. I mean, they're what's the old line? They're sort of like a swimsuit. They show a lot, but not everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And now I wonder really how accurate they are. What do you think is going to happen? 6 in the Congressional District 6 with Peacock and Caston. Ed says that's really going to tighten up. What do you think?
Yeah, I polls, as a political scientist, and we do our forecasting, polls are the foundation. And so when the polls get it wrong, we tend to get it wrong, which is why good polling is so critical. Good, unbiased, well-funded, well-researched polling. And so what's great about the polling we've seen in this particular midterm cycle is that we've learned from the mistakes of 2016 and 2020. So I think it's gotten better. Looking at the Illinois 6, I live adjacent to that district. And so it's interesting always driving around seeing who's got the signs and the yards and all of that. And while it's not surprising that polls are getting a little bit closer, because as we get closer to the election, registered Democrats and Republicans come home to their parties and start to say for whom they're going to vote, I don't see this as a race that Caston loses. The Peacock campaign is not spending as much money as the Caston campaign. And thinking about the way that this district has broke since 2018, it looks like it's really Caston's race to lose at this point.
Okay, so let's broaden out the view. You're really nationally tuned in to the big picture when it comes to Congress. A remarkable debate took place this week in Pennsylvania with hobbled, I mean, bless his heart, the Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, candidate for an open Senate seat there against Dr. Oz. Obviously, everyone knows who that is. Fetterman had a stroke several months ago, and even people that fall on the Democratic side, which he is, say the performance was beyond poor, and that race has gotten extremely tight, has it not?
Yeah, that race has tightened up considerably. And I will say that what's going to be interesting, speaking of polling again, is whether or not we're going to see any changes in the polling once we can track the debate performance. So seeing whether it had an effect. So there aren't Republicans who are going to vote for Fetterman. So it's really not as much about that as it is about maybe Democrats who, or those who are somewhere sort of leaning Democrat, who maybe voted for Biden but voted for Trump in 2016. Maybe they were Pat Toomey's fans, and they see Fetterman's performance and they think that he just might not be able. And I think what Fetterman did well was before the debate, he hedged a bit to say, let's set the bar pretty low for what my performance should look like because of, as he keeps calling it, the elephant in the room. I'm still having some processing issues from the stroke. But I think he performed under that expectation and has tried to do a little damage control after. But what I will say is that debates don't really have that much of an effect on voter perceptions, even at the presidential level. And so the race tightening might have less to do with the debate and more to do with the fact that as we get closer, as I said with Illinois 6, it's just that the voters who are registered to their parties are coming home to their parties.
How unconventional would it have been, and should Democrats have considered replacing Fetterman after the stroke?
You know, this was something that the party talked about pretty considerably because this was the concern. What's interesting, though, in this whole cycle, like the common theme is we're seeing that the quality of candidates doesn't really matter as much anymore because we're so calcified into our party. And so had they replaced Fetterman with someone else, would it have made a difference? Would the race be just as tight? I think it still would because it's Pennsylvania and it's just one of those hotly contested states.
That's kind of a remarkable sentiment.
Isn't it?
All right, let's go to another hot one that everyone's talking about. Walker, serving out partial term in Georgia against the football legend Herschel Walker, who's pretty far right in a state that's turned a bit blue over decades, shall we say. How's that one looking?
Yeah. This race is fascinating to me for lots of reasons, and I will say one of them is something I just mentioned, which is the quality of the candidate. So Herschel Walker, no political experience, was not out on the campaign trail, didn't want to debate, really, I should say, settled in President Trump's endorsement and the party machine in Georgia backing him. And how far right he is or moderate he is. In Georgia, Republicans are still pretty far right Republicans. It's just that there's more voters who are Democratic who are coming out, particularly minoritized Black voters coming out in larger numbers. So in this race, we talk about quality of the candidate again. By all traditional standards, Herschel Walker is not a quality candidate. But he's doing as well as he's doing because he's simply a Republican who's running in a state with a lot of Republicans. And so because Georgia has a runoff system, what we're seeing is most likely Warnock or Walker are not going to hit that 50% threshold, and we're going to see them running against each other again in December.
How about that? What do you think, Professor, is going to drive the vote? And one thing I think could be interesting this time around is we'll get an answer to how people voted, and it could be different based on whether they're voting for a candidate or an issue. And I say that maybe they vote one way in a congressional district, and then they vote another way on the Supreme Court race. And I bring this up because of the Kansas effect after Roe v. Wade was overturned, and we saw that surprising vote in red Kansas to support abortion rights. Do you think we'll see some votes that surprise us on November 8th?
I love this question, Joe. I'm trying to decide if I think this is going to happen myself. And what I will say this is that what we're seeing in the polls in Illinois and other states is that abortion and crime are not the most important issues to voters. It's inflation and the economy. But every single ad we're seeing at every level, it's about abortion and crime. And so are those the things driving voters? I don't think those are the issues driving voters. But the only additional issue or level of that is that we say we care about the economy and inflation, but we don't understand those issues. And so ads about crime, ads about abortion, we can understand those ads. And so they do drive a little bit of which party we want to select, or are we mobilized to vote for our chosen party? But the issues themselves, much like the quality of candidates don't matter as much, we're finding that the issues also matter less and less.
Well, it's the one thing that voters can point to and say this is what differentiates this candidate from another. It's black and white on that issue of abortion.
It's simple.
Exactly, as opposed to inflation. Crime also is a little bit simple, but that's my point. I think we may see people voting a certain way, whether it's based on crime, for one race and then a different way for other races that might have different implications. What do you think in the end is going to happen with the House and the Senate, Professor? The conventional wisdom, and I saw an article the other day where the House, they thought originally, might flip 10 to 15 seats to Republicans. Now they're thinking it might be 12 to 18, as this thing seems to be swinging away from Democrats and more toward Republicans as we get closer to Election Day.
Yeah, this is where the forecast models are really interesting. So one of the traditional thing we look at is what we call the generic ballot. So you ask people which party you want to control Congress come January. And right now the Republicans have a 0.5% advantage. But months ago, they had a 3% advantage. And before that, the Democrats had a 3% advantage. And so it's definitely tightening, but still in the Republicans' favor. So as the generic ballot looks a little smaller, then what we're thinking is that, to your point earlier, most predictions are that the Republicans are going to pick up between 8 and 15 seats. Right now, as we're like less than a week, or a little over a week out. Right. It's probably looking more towards 15, between 12 and 15. Right. And so, but the margin is only 9 for Democrats right now. So even if Republicans only win 12 to 15 seats, their margin in the House is razor thin. And then we get into the presidential cycle where it could flip to Democrats all over again.
What about the Senate?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Senate right now is looking most likely that the Democrats are going to lose a seat. So right now, Nevada for Senator Catherine Cortez Masto is not looking great. Looks like a Republican pickup probably. And so it's good. Worst case scenario, we're looking up to 3 seats for Democrats to lose. Best case scenario, they're picking up 1. But the most likely scenario is that the Democrats are going to lose 1 seat and therefore the technical majority.
That's Nevada?
In Nevada, yes, that race, because of the changing demographics and voting patterns in Nevada, Catherine Cortez Masto is definitely not safe in that seat whatsoever.
What are the 3 you think the Democrats might pick up? Is that Ohio, Pennsylvania still, Georgia?
Yeah, well, Georgia would be a retain since Warnock is right now the incumbent, but Ohio is potential between Vance and Ryan. I think to your point again, I think that Pennsylvania is a potential. And then looking at where else we see the pickups, this is where it's interesting for me because I'm only seeing 2. Some of the forecasts are looking at 3. I think in the states where we're seeing these other races where the Democrats are trying to pick up 1, it just doesn't look favorable. So I'm really looking at just those 2, honestly.
Okay. And Arizona, thoughts on that?
Arizona, I love me some Arizona because of the changes there, similar in some ways to Georgia. We've got Mark Kelly, who's very, very popular and positioned as a moderate against a Trump-backed, more further right Blake Masters. That race is polling close because it is one of those purpley sort of states, but really we're looking at Kelly is sort of similar to Kasten, is his race to lose. It should be Kelly coming out to serve a full term come January.
Okay, Kelly, of course, astronaut, husband of
Gabby Gifford.
Gifford, yeah. So, all right. Well, always fascinating to talk with you, Professor. Thank you for being a friend of the stream. We're sure to see more of you in the coming days, and we appreciate your insight.
Thanks, Professor.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. Take good care.
And joining us now, friend of the stream, longtime friend, Professor, former Alderman, Dick Simpson. Mr. Simpson, thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about politics. Let's throw the ball in your court. What's your favorite race? Which one are you eyeing most coming November 8th?
Well, I'm of course interested in all the statewide races, but the Democrats look to have pretty much a lock on those. I think the congressional races are the most interesting in the suburban area particularly. We lost 1 congressman due to census loss. And before it was a 13-5 Democrats to Republicans in our delegation in the House of Representatives. I think the Democrats are likely to pick up either 1 or 2 seats. The Republicans are going to lose and because the national race is so close, it may be for a change that the Illinois races make a difference to the actual margin.
Yeah, I mean, if you mentioned 5, so Illinois lost Kinzinger in the redistricting, and they lost Rodney Davis. So assuming Bost wins in 12 and Miller wins in 15 and LaHood wins in 16, the 2 possible, I guess, close races are 13 and 17 downstate. But also now you have heard from some of our previous guests that there is some thinking that District 6 might have tightened up here, along with possibly 14. Where do you see Republicans possibly picking up a seat or 2 if they do, to get back to where they are now at 5?
Well, if they had had better candidates in general, they would have had a chance to pick up several of the suburban districts. They were redrawn to try and give the Democrats advantage, but when they redrew them, they made them all new districts. So even Foster, Caston, Underwood, they're all running in different districts than they had last time. I think the Democrats are going to win all of those, but it's very tight. And then the Sorensen-King race that's in 17 is more or less tied in the polls, maybe a slight advantage to Sorensen. It all depends on turnout. The polls don't matter. What matters is who goes to the actual polls on Election Day, or votes by mail or by early voting. And whoever turns out the numbers is going to win in all of these races. They're all close enough that either side could win if they can fire up the voters and win over a few independents.
We were just talking with another professor, and she was talking about, you see all the ads right now. The Democratic ads are all about abortion, and the Republican ads are all about crime. But she said, really topic A for most American households is the economy, is inflation, but those aren't necessarily palatable in 30 seconds. So in your guesstimation, who's more motivated to show up in Illinois on November 8th, the Democratic base or the Republican base?
Well, I think the Democratic base is going to be pretty good in showing up. The big difference is the Republicans, the Trump Republicans, the more conservative Republicans, always show up in big numbers. So that's hard to overcome in these suburban areas. But the suburban areas have been tending Democratic, and it's going to be a test of where they are at the moment. What kind of level of support do they have? The economy does weigh heavily on the minds of voters. It's one of their number one issues. But it's really hard for either the Democrats or the Republicans to say, well, we'll fix by magic the economy tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Dick, the other reason we wanted to have you on was to look back a little bit. You just recently announced your retirement, 55 years in the game. Professor at UIC, you showed up there at UIC in '67. Numerous books, as Brad mentioned, former alderman. You've seen it all. What do you look back on in that time, in those 55 years? I mean, you were there in '68 for the convention. You were, a part of a real turbulent time in American politics, the assassination of Martin Luther King, of Bobby Kennedy, and then what happened in Chicago here during the convention. What stands out to you as one of the highlights or the memories you'll never forget?
I guess there are several. First, the '68 campaign, when I started out, actually '67, when we started to try and elect Jim McCarthy as president. But then the time I served in the city council leading the opposition bloc to Daley and Bilandic were very impactful for me, and I think for Chicagoans. I also was involved in the early parts of the Harold Washington campaign, and then again in the Lori Lightfoot campaign. And in between, I ran against Dan Rostenkowski, the most powerful congressman in America, before he was sent to federal prison.
The head of the Ways and Means Committee, correct?
Very powerful.
The guy who controlled
he was,
the purse strings.
Extraordinarily powerful. He controlled the tax bill that had a lot of extra goodies for a lot of different people. Even in the Chicago area, got some of their wealth from the Rostenkowski tax bills.
Yeah, and also congratulations, heartfelt. 50 years as a professor teaching and molding young minds is so important. You've done a lot of important work, but let's talk about city politics now. It's a little bit off the mayor's race. We know you are a light footer if we can term you as that. But let's talk about. I mean, you served on city council. Have you ever seen an exodus? I mean, because that's power positions. These are power positions. These are people who get in their wards, and I mean, they control their wards. They got their side hustles as whatever type of lawyer, you know, whether you're Ed Burke or O'Reilly and you know, two. Have you ever seen so many aldermen leaving by choice at one time?
Not by choice. We had two other great periods. The one I don't quite remember was right after World War II, when the vets came back and decided they wanted a piece of the power and tossed out a bunch of the old guys. The other was council wars, of course, where there was the battle between the 29 and the 21, and finally on the special elections, Harold was able to get a majority, and there were a lot of aldermen tossed out in both the first election in 1983 and 1987. But this exodus, the Great Resignation, as it's usually called in American life today, is for some of the same reasons. It's generational. These guys have been there a while, 20 years in many cases. They have had to deal with COVID just like everyone has. Not that they got it, but that they had to try and figure out how to use Zoom, and they're not the technologically most sophisticated. They had to run their offices by remote control. They couldn't open them, but yet they were still responsible for getting city services. It became a real drain on them, and I think it wore some of them out. So that's part of the reason, besides the politics of their individual ward, whether they wanted to run for higher office.
So you'll be a part of the mayor's reelection campaign. That'll take you through February of next year. You're going to retire. What are you going to do next, Professor?
Well, I'm talking to the university about maybe teaching in the winter, spring, a course that one of my favorites on the future of Chicago, which I've offered every year since 1976. And the other thing, I've got two books in the pipeline. One called 21st Century Chicago that'll be out in January, and another one that you guys would really like was the modern mayors of Chicago, all of the modern mayors from Harold Washington to Lori Lightfoot. I won't be able to predict what the whole 2023 election will bring in the future of that, but up until then. What
does the syllabus look like for the future of Chicago? I'm curious.
Well, I bring in 15 outside speakers, and from all sides of the political spectrum. I bring in aldermen, I bring in Cook County board members, I bring in former governors, and a lot of urban scholars who are doing really important, groundbreaking work on our politics, not only in Chicago, but in all the cities around the world. So that's it's divided into readings, and then every Friday they have discussion groups. They'll also see movies. I hope to be able to show, for instance, the Punch 9 movie that just came out of Harold Washington.
Yeah, I heard it's really good. Your retirement does not sound like a retirement, but I would expect.
I'm trying to figure that out. Maybe I can get some advice from some of your viewers how you retire.
After you run through the juggernaut that will be the mayor's race. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Aldermen have told me in some cases, yes, you're exactly right. COVID took a toll. Just, you know, the polarization of the voting public. They're sick of being trolled on Twitter about, you know, the gamut as to why, a cumulative effect of why they're leaving. But they also say the mayor isn't easy to work with a lot, and almost her leadership style can sometimes be Napoleonic, if we can, you know, coin that or term that. Would you have any critique of her in her first 4 years, that any growth areas as she reboots for re-election?
Well, I think some of the criticism about getting into personalities, Pats, is true, but I always sort of laugh at it. because Richard J. Daley, Richard M. Daley, and Rahm Emanuel were not exactly warm and fuzzy mayors.
Right, yeah.
And I remember being on like the enemies list with Richard J. Daley when I led the opposition bloc. So it's not new. We expect mayors to be powerful, and sometimes it does come down to personality, which is unfortunate. In terms of growth areas, I think the big issue, and if Lightfoot gets the next term, is coming to fulfill all of the efforts that have been started in what's called the progressive agenda. She's done well on the ethics agenda. It's a new day with restraints on automatic prerogative. There's several new ethics ordinance amendments. The Inspector General can now investigate the aldermen without their permission to do so, and on and on. The progressive agenda is a very good agenda if you're progressive, but it's been hard to implement because it was interrupted by COVID and the economic recession that came with COVID. So the progressive agenda will be the big item. And of course, in the election itself, crime will figure very heavily. But I'm not sure anybody knows how to solve the crime problem. I know all the candidates say they can, but I've tried to work on crime issues ever since I was alderman, and it's not easy.
Yeah. Well, we would give you a cake. 55 years of service. We didn't get you a cake, but Joe wore a pocket square today, which is a big deal for him.
I see he's very dressed up. I appreciate that.
I mean, a pocket square, we don't do that on the stream. So, but he did that for you. Professor, our thanks.
Yeah. Hey, listen, it's always been an honor to share the set with you over the years on election night, Professor. It's great to see you heading off into retirement, although I'm not sure he understands the definition of that word just yet.
It's GOLF. That's what retirement is. But this is not goodbye either. We're going to have you back tons.
Good to see you, Professor.
Well,
Thanks for the time.
I look forward to it.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Well, that was interesting.
And that's a wrap for this week. What are we calling this thing?
I don't know. Brad's.
Brad, Joe on a couch? I think it's called Iron Politics.
Yeah.
But that is our roundtable for this week. We are only going to have more hear from a lot of the candidates you heard about. You're going to hear from them in the stream. And we're going to have our power players back for more conversations as we near the 8th.
You've been busy.
Yeah.
I mean, the stream is the place for all the information you need on the
where
election.
the action is.
Yeah, I mean, that was interesting today. A couple of key points, I think, is it tightening up in some of these congressional races. We will see. I mean, the conventional wisdom is that it might have been an early night on November 8th. But to hear the polling now, maybe we have some races here, especially in 6, maybe in 14. We'll see what happens in 13 and 17.
Interesting. Redrawn by a Democratic legislature to favor Democrats, but now you've got Democrats really running in districts where they don't know their voters.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
3 great guests this week.
3 great guests.
Enjoyed it.
We appreciate you being with us. For Joe Donlon, I'm Brad Edwards. Thank you for joining us. Now we'll send it back to the stream.